Think if we could make a start, if that's okay. I hope you all had excuse me? Sorry. Just make a start, if that's okay. Sorry, I hope you all had an enjoyable evening in this lovely city last night. And yeah, we're going to be talking about M&As today. So I guess before I introduce myself, hands up, anybody who's been involved in an M&A in their career? Quite a lot of people, okay. So I'll just introduce myself firstly. So my name's Richard Weaver. I started my life as a chemist, actually, a synthetic chemist a while back, and then joined Astra in 1997, which merged and became AstraZeneca in 1999. I was there for 15 years, and I was there in drug metabolism, so drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics, or ADME, if you will. So supported many projects, around 65 projects in that time, really. And then, you know, interesting times, obviously the big change in pharma in terms of what that model was. One of my last roles at AstraZeneca was to be in charge of outsourcing to the Far East. I'm sure many of you have been involved in that before. So that was one of my last roles, and then unfortunately our site, along with many others, was closed. You know, so I was at the Charmouth site in the Midlands, and that was closed. So I had an opportunity to either stay with AstraZeneca or another pharma. But I decided to take the plunge, really, and set up my own CRO. So I've set up a DMPK CRO based in BioCity in Nottingham. We started with 3 people, and we're now 25 people. And so now on the other side, so I'm now part of a CRO organisation, and you know, I'll talk a little bit about that actually in M&A later on. You know, quite an exciting area to be in. So without further ado, I'll let the panellists introduce themselves. I'll just have 2 slides really, just to hopefully stimulate some discussion on a few key areas this morning, and then hopefully we'll have a lively debate. So please, over to Vincenzo.
Hi, my name is Vincenzo Di Nicola. As you can see from the slide, I'm the only one without a PhD sign, so I have a finance background. I'm a banker. I've been doing investment banking since I started my professional life, focused on pharma and pharma services. I'm a managing director of a global bank called BERT. We are very strong in what we are going to discuss today. My team has been involved in hundreds of transactions between financing and M&A. Financing is both private financing, so venture capital into biotech, or financial sponsoring to pharma outsourcing services, as well as public financing, so IPOs, predominantly in the US, which is the largest market, where we have also the boldest equity analysts. Obviously, part of the other transactions are M&A, so I've been part of merger between equals, investments from, again, private investor into companies, etc., etc. My job is to talk to some of the key companies to try to understand what the strategic priorities are, and most of the times the fulfillment of those strategic priorities achieved with M&A. We will discuss more of these topics in the next few minutes.
Okay, so my name is Detlef Behrens. I'm from a background a pharmacist. I have worked 16 years in sales, contract manufacturing, was involved in a couple of site acquisitions, moved into procurement, I think dealing with the CMOS at the other side of the table. And in March of this year, together with a very good business partner, we created Bay Pharma. Focuses on repurposing drugs. And that means, okay, we are a virtual company, 2 people, so we have to deal a lot with contract manufacturers, and I think the constantly changing environment.
Hi everybody, my name is Araz Raouf, and I'm heading the external early drug development within Janssen Pharmaceutica, based in Belgium, part of Johnson & Johnson. Together with my team, actually, we realize how difficult to develop new medicines. So with my team, we are trying to leverage our know-how and expertise and help the partners to be successful and mitigate some of the discovery and early development issues. Prior to this role, I was heading drug discovery for Janssen globally, I have been involved in various actually partnership buildings, acquisitions, primarily from diligence perspective and R&D portfolio and innovation perspective. And before Johnson & Johnson, I worked in Ireland in Elan Pharmaceutical Technology, so I have actually the expertise both in small biotech and as well as big pharma.
Hi everybody, I'm Nigel Ramsden. I'm a chemist, trained as a chemist. Unlike Richard, I've not been able to give it up. I'm still a chemist 30 years later. I came up through the various ranks of GSK, so I've lived through big pharma mergers. I've bought small biotechs for GSK. I've then worked in a biotech that's been bought by GSK. There's a theme running through all of this. And now I'm in the CRO world, so I probably span just about everything as well.
That's great, thank you very much. So hopefully you can see we've got a broad range of experience. Again, I've been to this conference for quite a few years now. I think I missed maybe 1 or 2 years, but it's been interesting to me how it's evolved actually over this time. You know, it was actually once dominated by big pharma, which I'll be honest, I wasn't particularly happy with. That's changed a lot now, so it's really nice that we've got a nice balance across that whole sector really. I think that reflects in terms of what this new business model is for delivering drugs, and that's quite clear. It used to be obviously all in-house within big pharma. That's not the case anymore. You know, AstraZeneca many years ago stated that they would have 60% or more of their portfolio would be from external, for example. So, and we heard some of those themes yesterday of how it's, you know, it's multiplayers everywhere. It's biotechs, you know, the various different models. So, perhaps if I just go to just a slide, in terms of this is what we said we would talk about. So, in terms of are we on the verge of further major pharma industry collaboration? We can talk about that in a moment. Consolidation, maybe the mega mergers won't be happening anymore, but we can talk about that. And what's the ideal size and structure of the service providers to pharma? I think that's a really important one. But I think we have to ask the question, what do we want? What does the service provider want, first of all? Define what that means. And who's thriving and why? And our collaborations and partnerships between pharma and tech companies, large and small, the way forward, as we move towards the value-based healthcare models. What is the new commercial value proposition model? And then outcome-based, performance-based contracts. The things I'd like to focus on really, I'd like to split it into 3 if that's okay, and this is where I'll involve the panelists and certainly involve you guys as well. So, talk about pharma acquisitions of biotechs. You know, that's been happening a lot, arguably less so in more recent years, and I think Araz has some stats on that, for example. And maybe a controversial statement that I've put up there, will they ultimately stop doing their own internal R&D? I personally think that's a real possibility, actually. You know, they'll always have money. There'll always be a great marketing campaign and development organisations. They'll make things happen. So that, I think that could be a possibility. Mergers and acquisitions, are they really on the decrease? Actually, it looks like they might be, looking at the stats. But is that a blip? And then we'll talk about risk share models. I think that's really important, actually, and due diligence. And then perhaps a little bit something closer to home to myself, but I think that's really important in terms of new medicines, about CRO consolidation and where this will lead. You know, quite impressive. You know, if you look at the deals here, you know, 42 billion deals in 2017 years to date. Amazingly, the CRO sector, 24 billion. You know, quite impressive. Really. And then I will talk about some of those individual ones. So perhaps we could start with the first point really, and talk about the pharma acquisition of biotechs. Maybe I could ask the panelists in terms of their view. Maybe Araz, in terms of, you know, what are you looking for, you know, in J&J when you not necessarily acquire, but when you look to work with biotechs, perhaps?
Right. Well, I think when you buy a house, they say location, location, location. I think for us, it's innovation, innovation, innovation. We are not in the business of Me Too's or generics, so if we are very much innovative-driven organization. So I think innovation, it's key. But also, I think when we look into not only acquisitions, but also collaborations, strategic fit is very, very important. And often it's not only in the areas that we actually focused in and strong at, but more adjacencies and new therapeutic areas. So, for instance, our recent acquisition and partnership with Actelion in Switzerland was driven by our desire to create a new therapeutic area around pulmonary artery hypertension, which we did not have as a focus area before. So I think that there are many, many factors that would drive actually the type of partnership and acquisition. It's only one mechanism. We have multiple other ways to partner with people. I think it's the strategic fit, it's the new desire to be in new therapy areas is to access to innovation. And above all, patients' needs really, because I think, as I said, you know, we do not like Me Too's and generics, so it has to be novel, it has to address an unmet medical need.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this on the panel?
Yeah, I can just agree. I think it's about innovation, or finding innovation. So within Bay Pharma, we just managed, I think, within 7 months to acquire all the IP rights of a project which is in development. We need to be realistic. Neither my partner nor I are, I think, as creative, I think, to come out with such ideas. But I think if we have access to it, we can really make something out of it. So that's probably the same model. We need to rely on people, I think, really being creative, coming up with ideas up to a certain point, and then we can just take it up and make a product out of it, which will make it to market.
And in terms of the models out there, in terms of, obviously there are multiple. One is, you know, literally an acquisition of a biotech and literal IP. But then there are other models as well. So in terms of potential risk share or collaboration deals where you'll co-create something together. Again, would anybody have any comments on whether that's likely to be more prevalent going forward?
I can take it. I mean, if you see the evolution of the acquisition of the biotech has decreased, and we can cover it later why, but if you see the evolution of the partnership, large partnerships are still very important. You know, we've seen what the Amgen, Sanofi, they're doing recently. It's, you know, there's been a lot of funding in the biotech. There has been an increasing number of emerging biotech. So what we say, funding bonanza, biotech bonanza, you know, a lot of research, a lot of innovation, but not all of this innovation translates into commercial molecules. So it's a win-win situation when you find a risk-sharing model where the pharmaceutical company doesn't take 100% of the R&D risk, somehow they fund one piece of the business model of the molecule. So partnerships are still in place. We're seeing more and more options, so call option into either a company or part of the portfolio of the companies. So instead of having a licensing deal, there is an agreement, a sort of funding into the biotech, whereby I say, okay, if you get some milestones, I have the option to buy that molecule or that company at a defined price. Again, it's a way to reduce the burn to the biotech and give an upside to both companies, the pharmaceutical on the development of a viable molecule, and to the biotech on the development of the molecule.
I think one of the differences between the two models, Richard, is probably that with a risk share model, you need to have a much better cultural fit between the two organisations. When I was at Cellzoma Biotech, we had a collaboration with Janssen, and we had a big collaboration with GSK. And interestingly enough, the better cultural fit, I suspect, was with Janssen, who weren't the company that bought us in the end. It was GSK. And I think the better science, the better innovation, I'm not saying this because Ros is sitting next to me, came out of that Janssen collaboration. And that was just because it was a better cultural fit.
Yeah. I think that's you know, something I wanted to lead on to. I mean, again, maybe a show of hands of people who are in the biotech sector. Are there many people here in that sector? In the audience? One or two, yeah, sure. And any of you involved at the moment in terms of discussions with large pharma or partners, and whether you'd be willing to share any of your experience on that? Not at the moment, or not willing to share.
I can add a few comments there, actually, Richard. I think from, if I see the European landscape, I think, and I agree with Vincenzo, I think we need to do more in transferring great ideas into businesses. And I think there are issues why this is not happening to the extent it's happening in US, for instance, because access to capital is an issue in terms of risk averseness. Culturally, it's one point affecting us, but also access to know-how and expertise. I think I see time and time enough, you know, people with great ideas, but they struggle how to take that forward into a viable biotech or a small startup. So I think that putting that aside in one basket, the other side of the coin is really flexibility by the big players to really, you know, drive partnership. I think acquisition, it's, for me, at least as a scientist, it's a very straightforward transaction. It's somewhat rigid. But if you want to extract value early on for early assets, you really need to be flexible. And that flexibility requires risk sharing sometimes, you know, work with a partner to achieve that goal. But a lot of time also help the partner, if it's academia or industry, either give the fund or the know-how or expertise, or actually help to incubate startup companies like we do sometimes in various or geographies. So you can do a lot to thrive that ecosystem, and of course, risk sharing, I see personally as a scientist, it's a great opportunity for companies that would focus on an area, but they actually struggle to take that forward, and then together we can create that win-win situation.
Yeah, I'd definitely say that's a positive, you know, in terms of really, it's a buy-in, isn't it? It's a proper team effort then, and the culture then works, you know, you're working towards the same goal in essence. I mean, maybe a comment that I've heard, you know, in the past is that, you know, the big pharma, when they come in, they can stifle that innovation of a small company, you know, and I think I've seen that. But things are changing there, and definitely the experience I've seen, you know, certainly with J&J and others, things seem to be changing there. So again, I don't know if the panelists have any comments on that. You know, it's always going to be difficult because, you know, a big company syndrome versus a lean and mean and vibrant biotech, for example, where they have to move quickly, they have to make firm decisions quickly, and not have to go to various levels of committee, shall we say, to pass things through. So, I wonder if anybody has any comments on that, really.
I think it comes down to, again, that flexibility, and as Raz said, accepting that there is a difference in mindset between the two different cultures, and big pharma should accept that and live with it, and accept that it's what they're not good at, rather than trying to pressure biotechs to behave like big pharma, which unfortunately all too frequently does happen.
Yep, I absolutely agree with that. That's great. Thank you. I think the lady there wanted to make a comment. Thank you.
Hello. I'm commenting from my experience of working at Roche for many years, and working with Genentech. So initially Roche had a stake in Genentech, and eventually acquired Genentech. All the time we had the instructions, we were firmly told, you know, that keep Genentech at arm's length, so that Genentech can do what they are good at, and that we don't sort of overwhelm them with our processes and everything like that, so they can continue to be innovative and creative, etc.
Yeah, no, that's good. Absolutely, that's great. Thank you. Any further comments on that from the audience? Any experiences? The people that work in the biotech, let me ask you that question. You know, how do you like working in a biotech versus working in big pharma, if that's been the case? Let me ask that question. Yes, Dave.
Well, I worked for a short time in a mixed model biotech, which had a CRO side to its business that was generating revenue. It was also spending money on developing its own pipeline, and that's a very difficult balance to live with. And ultimately, that company, Synexis, ended up selling its CRO business, and the assets then moved into what essentially, although it's the same shareholding, was a company that just had a single asset, and that asset is moving forward at the moment. We'll wait to see what's going to happen to it. The problem in the biotech was that the need always to raise money. It was a constant round of fundraising. As soon as you got one lot of money in, it was on the circuit again to raise another lot of money. So looking back on it, that's 15 years ago, I think you need to have the end goal in sight and your partner in your at the start. So having that close relationship with who's going to take the asset at the end is very important. Otherwise, it's just all-consuming trying to fund the business.
And I think that's a really, really valid point there, Dave. Thanks. Any comments on that or reaction to that statement from the panelists?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, good. No, I was going to say, I mean, simply we learn from each other. So basically, we learn from biotech. I mean, when we see the speed and the agility of the biotech, and of course, big pharma is big and has a lot of processes. But often the challenge is when we see things moving very quickly, you know, very energetically at the biotech, you have to kind of take that message and bring it in. Guys, let's move on, you know. And why does it take us three months to kind of probably finalize a contract versus it's 2-3 weeks in a biotech? So I don't see it as a cultural clash. I see it more as an opportunity actually to bring some of the good elements of biotech to big pharma and vice versa as well.
I think the 2 points are relevant because there is the Genentech, which is what we call the real biotech, with a discovery development platform that keep developing new molecules. And it is important to keep them separate culturally, even from the acquirer. But over the last 10 years, we have seen a lot of what we call the single asset biotech. They actually have licensed from academies some molecules. Their end point is to sell into strategics. Otherwise, the business is a cash burn. So in that case, the strategic fit is less relevant. It's more important to identify the molecule and make sure that the molecule fits with the portfolio of some of the mid or large pharma.
That's a really good point, thank you. I think the gentleman there had a comment.
Yeah, so Christian Jones from Johnson Matthey. My feeling around this area is that large pharma are externalising a lot of their R&D innovation that they used to be so well known for to external companies, small biotechs, and effectively it's taking that risk out of their business and placing the risk elsewhere into smaller companies. The challenge, however, for the smaller biotechs is sometimes they've only got one asset or a couple of molecules. If one of those fails, their business goes bust. And also from an investor perspective, if you're a CEO of one of those companies, you may get one chance, perhaps a second chance in the UK as a CEO if you failed once. In the US, people are more open to failure, investors. So they don't mind, if the CEO has been unsuccessful 2 or 3 times, they're still perhaps willing to invest if they've got the right business model. So I guess I just see it as a challenging situation for the biotech community. What is effectively having all the risk placed on them. I wonder, what's Big Pharma's response to that, and how do they wish to support the biotechs in that space?
Well, maybe I can partly answer that and then throw that over to the panel. I think that's a really great question, actually. And I think it comes down to due diligence, really. So, in my experience from working with biotechs and supporting biotechs, actually, often, they're very experienced. They might be world leaders, for example, if they've spun out of a university in a particular receptor or something. But they don't necessarily know what they need to do to make it into a drug. And I think that's really important. There's just a simple stat, for example. I think 40% of all drugs are poorly soluble, for example. But going forward now, it's 80% of drugs entering development are poorly soluble. And that's ultimately because they haven't done the job properly. The compound hasn't been optimized properly. So big pharma are rightly doing their due diligence, and they're doing it hard, they're doing it well. But the biotechs, I think, need help from people like us and some of the people here today in terms of ensuring the quality. It does have the legs to go all the way. Very early on, make a dose prediction, make a pharmacokinetic prediction, the kind of things we do very early on in drug discovery. Is it going to be a 10 milligram drug once a day, or actually is it really going to be 2 grams and therefore not a drug? So I think getting that early due diligence, getting the quality right at the biotech and guiding those biotechs by working together, multiple players there working together to help them, I think that's the key to ensuring some success there.
Yeah, if I can just respond on what you said, Christian, two things here. I completely agree with you. Predominantly in Europe, you're not allowing people to make a failure. And that's part of, I think, success is, making a failure. And I would really love, I think, if there is more respect for that you can just fail with a company and then do it again and start again, and I think being successful. But that's something that will for sure take years, I think, to just change that cultural thing. And second, what you said, you was mentioning, you believe that's a bit of a let's say push back of the risk from large pharma into biotechs. I don't see that in a way. I believe it's I think the biotech people, they have great ideas, and it's less a thing from big pharma to push the risk back into them. they partly just let them do because they have that flexibility. And something what I like yesterday, for one of the statements from Franz Hummer, he was saying innovation comes from the small companies, but it will require the big ones to bring that innovation to market. And that's for me, I think, the model which will most likely grow in the future. To have that small biotechs coming up with great ideas, push them forward up to a certain point, and then you're right, Richard. I think then there need to be the support from larger organizations, I think, to create a drug which is marketable.
If I can add a point, if you see the growth on R&D on the large cap pharma is 2-3% per annum. It's how much they spend in R&D per annum. If you see the small and mid-sized biotech is 9%, it's 3 times as high. So then there is a life cycle in terms of funding. The large pharma don't get very early, but you have other sources of funding. The venture capital, which have been a very important source of funding for the biotech. If you see the fundraising from venture capital, 2015 was the peak year. If you see the uninvested capital from venture capital, it's at the peak. They've been putting a lot of money into biotech, but also IPOs. Most of these small and mid-sized biotech, once they get to phase 1, they try to, phase 1A or B, they try to get into the public market, especially on the US. As I said, in the US you have very bright and bold, I would say, investors, as well as analysts that can convey the story. So that funding can allow this biotech company to get up to the second milestone, which is phase 2. At that point, large cap pharma are more willing to take risk. There is more visibility on the deliverability of those molecules. So there is a life cycle. I mean, there are other sources of funding, but going back to your point, there are a lot of biotech which are one single asset. I mean, we always, even as a advisor, we always try to differentiate the ones that have developed the molecule and have the ability to perhaps develop new molecules, or the single asset biotech that have in-licensed the molecule. The one, I would say, it's almost a bet you're making on the efficacy of a new chemical entity.
I think if I add to that, I think it's important to know what's your business model as a biotech or a startup or a big pharma, and what is your exit strategy if you are a biotech, or do you want to take it all the way, together to the marketing? And I've seen, of course, many players. Or do you want to partner, and when do you want to partner? I think often, actually going back to whether you can do it or you cannot do it, relies on, are you prepared for taking the risk, or do you want to share that risk? I certainly think, we see more and more often is the small startups and small biotechs, a great engine for generating an idea, and of course, because of the diversity and the depth of knowledge that you need to take it through the clinical, phases of development, and later on through registration, commercial strategy, etc., that you would actually partnership, with somebody. But to be honest, I think all depends on the desire of the players, what they want to do and how they want to resource themselves, and where in that, sphere of things you want to share the risk and the rewards.
I think one other thing just to pick up on with that comment is it's the fear of failure, and I think that's still one of the big problems with the industry today, is not stopping projects quickly enough because people's jobs and livelihoods and companies depend on it. And I think it's interesting now that the sort of virtual, semi-virtual biotechs are starting to appear with a much higher frequency. There is no infrastructure. If the asset fails, people should be rewarded for that asset failing if they've done it appropriately, and then move on and do it again with one that will hopefully be successful. If that one doesn't work, do it again. Provided people are making good decisions, they should be rewarded appropriately, I think.
Yeah, I agree, Nigel. And again, I mean, sorry, I think there's a comment here in this moment, just a quick comment from me on that. Absolutely, it's amazing what you can do with so little resource, actually. I think that's a key message. I've come from a big pharma background, where budgets generally have been quite large. You have large projects. There is a lot of waste. That's definitely true. Whether that's still true now, I don't know. But it is amazing what you can achieve. You know, the thing I've said is the most successful project is the one with the least amount of compounds synthesized. You've learned from every molecule, you know, into that design, make, test cycle, and maximise the value out. You know, and as Nigel says, you know, you need to understand if things can work or fail very, very quickly. So I think it is amazing what you can do with a small amount of resource in terms of people and funding. Actually, only the key experiments. So sorry, I think this gentleman had a comment there.
Hi, Simon Tyler, Catside. I wonder if I could just pick up on a point that Richard made at the start of that conversation and ask the panel if they have any thoughts, or in general people have any thoughts on the value of what really might be called CMC activities in early development in the biotech sector. And I guess what I'm really thinking is, given that we've already heard that the cash pressures on biotechs, is what would you like to see done? How can we encourage them to invest a bit earlier in some of these things too, which I think ultimately will actually increase the value of the asset, but that's as a service provider who's trying to encourage people to engage in. So I guess I'm just trying to think, is that valuable? Should that be a message that the biotech sector should be picking up on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's kind of the last session, but we'll take that now because I guess it's CRO. So again, any comments? Maybe Detlef, you can comment on that.
No, I think I just want to come to one point you said, Aras. The business model is extremely important for biotech companies. So my partner and I had a chance to assess a lot these repurposing drugs from quite exciting companies, very exciting people, great ideas, but I think they have invested a lot amount of money by themselves up to a certain point. They have no clue, I think, how to find a marketing partner for that. And even I think if you start talking to them on the business case of the product, then I think it's a simple piece of paper. There is no science behind, I think, what's the market potential of such a product. I think how to place it in the market, and these are some very fundamental gaps. And you're right. I think as long as you don't have a right business model, then then you can have great ideas, but then the likelihood of failure is increasing significantly.
No, I think on the CMC part, I mean, I see many times as I'm interacting with small biotechs and startups is that they struggle actually with the quality of the products. And it's very important for us because when we enter into, say, an acquisition phase or a serious risk-sharing model, you would like to make sure that the partner is actually thought about that and able to demonstrate the value of that particular asset. So in the areas of small molecules, for instance, you know, think about your synthesis route, think about your, you know, the quality of a GMP batch early on, and do that actually not at the last minute while you are preparing for a first in human, because I think many times that I've seen it time and time again, great idea, great molecule, but at the end of the day, so many issues that it's affecting the timing, it's affecting the not being able to demonstrate whether the biology works or not because of that. Of course, Big Pharma has a lot of expertise in there and can help out, but I think as a small biotech, you should really think that early on. And there are so many providers out there, you know, ask help and seek it. So that's my advice.
And I think it's really important as well. And of course, it's very tempting within the biotech to, we'll worry about that later. You know, no problem. We'll worry about that later. Let's get an asset. Let's get some value. You know, let's get some IP, for example. But I agree. I think that's important.
I think sometimes it goes a bit broader than that as well. And I think in some ways, biotech is in a nice environment at the moment where a lot of the people working in biotech have got that big pharma experience. And they've been trained to think about what the problems might be in the future. It's not just CMC, there are a whole variety of other things it might be, and what are we going to do to address those problems now before they become problems? My worry is that in 20 or 30 years' time, when people aren't Big Pharma trained anymore, is there going to be that experience to make those judgment calls that say, actually, we've got this molecule, but I think liver tox is going to be a problem in 3 years' time?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. We'll come on to that later on, actually. I think we're just going to move on now just to the next section, if that's okay. Interestingly, M&As are on the decrease, so this is something I guess I was slightly aware of, but you know, I've read into it a little bit more, and I guess I was a little surprised actually. You know, so I think Araz sent some some nice slides from, was it BioEurope, I believe?
BioEurope, yes.
So just some stats here. I think it was 2014, the preclinical M&As, it was 312. This year to date, it's 141. And it's all the way down the phases as well. So phase 1 all the way down to marketed. You know, phase 3, for example, there were 100 M&As in 2014 and 40 this year to date. So I'd like to ask the panel and also the audience in terms of what do you think the drivers are? What are the reasons for that? And you know, is it just cyclical, or is there a, you know, is there a real reason behind that? So maybe Horace, perhaps from a large pharma first of all, you could.
Yeah, well, I mean,
that.
I've seen the figures in BioEurope in Berlin last week, and I took us some screenshots, and to be honest, came to me as a surprise because, of course, we see, at least from where I'm sitting, a lot of activities around, not particularly mergers in our case, acquisitions, or actually the various other, you know, ways of, you know, partnershiping. So especially at the preclinical phase, because I thought, you know, while we have a decline at a more mature late stage, I was expecting that we would see more at the earlier phases, but the stat is down. I think these are cyclical things. I also think it's probably affected by other forces, like access to capital, the whole, you know, issues around maturation of certain technologies, etc. And I probably don't have the right answer as to why we've seen the decline. I think a couple of other issues around it. It's maybe primarily not in the nature of the numbers, more on around where they are happening, you know, especially in certain therapy areas. Oncology is a big buzz now,
Absolutely,
for instance, and then there is a lot going out there. So maybe if we divide the numbers per therapy areas, we see a very different kind of trend to that curve.
I mean, immuno-oncology, for example, is the hot potato, isn't it? So, I mean, maybe Vincenzo, you know, from your experience in terms of that, do you have any comments on?
Yeah, I mean, going back to your point, oncology, CNS, infectious disease remain very, very active as M&A. Nevertheless, the volume has dropped in 2017. The view we have is, if you look at the big pharma, they're struggling for growth. And dividend is not enough any longer to keep the share price and the valuation to where they were. So the current focus is on trying to put, you know, the phase 3, phase 4 in the market, or push the commercialization, or buy companies that already provides growth. So the M&A in the biotech might have suffered from this trend, focus on bringing growth back to the top line of the P&L of the companies. The second point, the fact that there is such funding bonanza, the valuation have been growing a lot since the last 2-3 years. I mean, just to give you an idea of the pre-money valuation of Series D financing from 2016 to 2017. 2016 for a Series D, the median of a pre-money valuation was $140 million. This year to date, is $350 million. So its valuation has been growing to the sky. So the combination of big pharma focus on real growth, rather than, you know, future growth, and valuation very high for promising but yet to be proven technology have pushed the volume down in all categories. Having said that, I agree with Horace. Oncology, CNS, infectious disease remain pretty active as markets.
Yeah, that's great. Again, any comments from the audience on that in terms of their personal experience? Yes, gentleman there.
Sorry, Joe Katz, PwC. I think, can I just ask a question? I'm not sure how those numbers are cut, but isn't it the case now also that there's a big focus for big pharma on actually disposing of divisions in a way that 2 years ago it seemed that all they were doing was acquiring, whereas now, you know, things like a number of the generics divisions are coming up for sale. You know, it's less sort of all-encompassing acquisitions. I don't know if the panel has a view on that.
The disposal of the generics is related to the fact that they want to do less better, especially then generics is seen also less attractive for them. All you know, if you think the gross profit as well as the pressure on pricing. but it doesn't really impact. Actually, if you dispose, then with that cash, you need to reinvest to keep the growth. So there's I see it as a little bit different. I mean, focus. Once you have defined your focus, you invest to continue the growth.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Absolutely. And for us personally, I can't talk about probably other trends. It was never a factor in our strategy, the whole area around generics. So basically, we had no interest in it. I think the aim is too much on differentiation, innovation, and really addressing some complex diseases where there is a huge unmet need.
Thank you. I think probably for the last 15 minutes, might move on now into the last part, if that's okay, with regards to CROs. So outsourcing is here to stay, at least until 2022 or further, and I'm sure it's further. The CAGR growth, 16% continuous, that's here to stay. So the CROs now, CDMOs, etc., have a major part to play here with regards to helping that innovation move to market. So the M&A scene has been very active in this area as well, extremely active. I watch that, being part of that environment. I guess I've listed a couple of deals that have gone here, some really big deals with the big players here, and perhaps closer to home here in the UK. Biotech recently acquired Cyprotex, but also Aptuit as well. And then there's a new sort of model out there. There's a company called Concept Life Sciences where they've essentially bought several different companies and brought it together as an offering as well. And then also obviously the Charles River acquisition of Biofocus and Argenta, two very successful CROs, Biofocus and Argenta, into one sort of super CRO really. So I guess I'm very interested in what people think about that. What is the ideal size for a CRO to support? For example, to support a large pharma versus, for example, biotech. So I'd like to throw that open to the panel really in terms of size of CRO and breadth of what they do and where that's relevant. So.
Yeah, so I think I have a couple of comments on that. I've seen a lot of CROs or CMOs growing via acquisition, and for me it's still a collection of sites and not a company. So I see a lot of these companies really failing in the integration of the facilities into a common company, and a lot of them, I think, they just grow. I think they just add further technology, sites, assets to their portfolio, but they're still missing a value proposition. And this is something where I'm struggling, I think, to see the value. That only comes if I really have something fundamental to offer. And I think working for a smaller company, I think is okay that that M&A activities of the CMOs, that's driven by the needs of large pharma. I think they want to reduce the number of suppliers, and they can only do that, or they only find, I think, or can manage it if they have CMOs with a lot of technologies, while they can just bundle a huge number of products and projects. The challenge for the small companies then is to find a suitable CMO, because if they deal with, if a big CMO is dealing with all the big players, and then you come as a small company, then you are not even a C customer, you probably would have an F or G customer, so they don't take care of you. But that means, at the other hand is if you want to sell your asset at a later stage to a large pharma company, you ideally have to set up your supply chain in a way that is attractive for large pharma. But I think you don't get the CMO support for your project. And that will somehow go back into, as a boomerang, into the large pharma companies, because then I think they're not getting the products they would love to get, I think, from the biotechs with the right quality.
Great, that's great. I think I'm sorry, Araz, I have another question for you, if that's okay. But, if we go back maybe 5 years, big pharma were outsourcing capacity versus creativity. So I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about those two things. They're very different, and everybody has to be clear exactly what they want here. And it was quite clear, capacity was the key there. So the big drive, you know, many of them outsourced, you know, to China and India, you know, handle turning, do it cheap and quickly. But the strategy hadn't changed. So I'm very intrigued from Aras to feel how, you know, what do you want from CROs that you're working with? What are you after from particular CROs now? What's the major driver?
Yeah. Well, I think if I look back, I mean, I probably worked in 25 years in industry, and if I see the type of activities we were doing in-house then versus now, has been a huge shift towards, you know, doing work externally. And primarily, I think the driver was for the change is the availability of very good quality CROs now, with a good talent and a global reach. So I think these are the criterions we will be looking at: is the quality, the talent pool, the global reach are probably very, very important. And I think there's a pressure from big pharma perspective inside to be very efficient and very effective, and really prioritize the tasks that we feel we can differentiate vis-a-vis the CRO. So you see a lot of outsourcing happening, and that's, I think, fine, because sometimes what I'm looking at, it's what are the differentiating factors? You know, we get approached by many providers, but I think differentiation sometimes is a key, especially for early assets, and because sometimes you really look into a specialty area, you know, that is not available in a bigger within a bigger player. So I'm very actually you know, happy that we have now very CROs focus on the early stuff and the discovery stuff, like the biotechs and others, you know, that you can actually contract them not only one experiment, but a series of activities, like do the screening for us, come up with a molecule, you know, and then we can take that forward. I think that's also a key. It's the ability to master a complexity of a chain of event rather than just doing one single experiment.
And I'm guessing, you know, in terms of what you would want from a CRO is very different from a big pharma versus, say, a biotech, for example. So, I mean, maybe, Nigel, whether you wanted to comment on that, you know, what does a biotech want from a CRO versus, say, a large pharma?
And I think, again, that probably fits very much on size of biotech rather than just a biotech. So as CSO of a small biotech, virtual biotech, which is one of my other jobs, what I want is the brains. I don't just want the pairs of hands. I need the brains to tell me where my brain has gone wrong, and I need to be corrected. And I think that's possibly one of the big differences. Is I see a lot with academic research groups in this country. They've gone to a CRO and said, make me 300 molecules. The CRO has made them 300 molecules because that's what they've been told to do, but very little thought has gone into the 300 molecules that have been made. And as you said, one would have answered exactly the same question. So I think it really is that differentiation of, do you want the brains, or do you want it's the quality versus quantity that you were talking about earlier. I think big pharma can almost get away with it. The brains are internally in big pharma. What they really want is the support to make things happen. I think small biotechs, virtual biotechs, it's the brains that are important.
No, and I agree with Nigel, because if you see the outsourcing penetration in big pharma, you are 40–45%. You try to keep a balance. What you have in-house and what you outsource. Aras was correct. They tend to outsource. There's novelties where, you know, they're not 100% sure they're gonna be successful. So, you know, half the risk. Some of these biotech, especially the virtual one, they outsource 100%. So the CRO is a strategic partner. There is a consultative model with the CRO. I agree. And you need proximity of the brains. Whereas with the large cap, it's literally the scale. Biotech is an example. The acquisition up to it. If you speak with Werner, he tells you, I need talent everywhere to run as many projects as I can. And, you know, as a advisor, we always compare what's happening in the CRO, like the Quintiles, LabCorp, Covance, so the ones that run the trials. There is a one-to-one relationship between the big pharma and clinical trial organization, Takeda, PRA, Pfizer, Icon. if you see in the CDMO, there are, you know, Merck 200 suppliers. So we're seeing more and more the CDMO model mirroring the clinical trial organization for the large cap. So scale is very important. For the small and mid-sized biotech, Nigel is correct. You need to be very, very close to the company. Try to do all the functions that they cannot do because their bandwidth is very lean. And I don't know, 3, 4, 5 people companies.
Great. And any experience from the audience? You know, anybody from the biotech sector? You know, in terms of these mergers, you know, one ultimate aim is that just ends up with a load of large players, just as we've had a large pharma in the background with these continual mergers of the CROs. Is that what you want, or do you want, as Nigel said, you know, the brains, the help on the specialist areas? Any comments from anybody in the biotech area?
And it's, sorry, interrupting, it's a question that always concerns me, is as CROs in the discovery space get bigger and bigger and bigger, do they become just as inefficient as big pharma?
Exactly. Absolutely. Any comments on that? Is it just big company syndrome? It doesn't matter whether you're a CRO, a biotech, or a pharma, or maybe Google. Any comments?
So, I guess more a question on the CDMO aspects of this. If you look at some of the deals that have been done recently in that space, Thermo Fisher acquiring Patheon, you know, $7.2 billion. That's an absolutely humongous organisation now.
Yeah.
How would they service a small biotech client or a startup company compared to, you know, some of the smaller CDMO organisations that are very effective and can provide that level of service to those clients? So I think, you know, from a CDMO perspective, in terms of identifying the appropriate CDMO, it's important for the biotech or for the large pharma clients almost to match themselves with the CDMO organisation. Are they mirrored with their values, with the value proposition that they're delivering to the clients? You know, a lot of large pharma are looking for potentially the same thing, but they put the value emphasis in different areas. So they're, you know, they're focused on things like ethics, compliance, health and safety and environment are critically important for them in identifying the right partner. Whereas for a smaller, you know, small startup biotech, they're looking at risk, consultancy, innovation, how can that client deliver those things? Not to say that's not what the large pharma clients are looking for, but the value and the level of that value is placed in different areas from the different sizes of organisations. So I think certainly from the way that, you know, Johnson Matthey will work across the board, from small clients to large pharma clients, but we have to think very carefully about what type of teams that we put in place to support those smaller clients, to deliver that, as Nigel was saying, more of a consultancy style approach to maybe the larger organisations where you have to think more about capacity, flexibility, security of supply chain and other factors that perhaps are more important.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really valid point, actually. I think it probably leads on now. I mean, I'll wrap up shortly in a moment. I'll give out, you know, a transfer time over to the next speakers in session. But I think I'd like to get some comments, really, perhaps from the panel individually. You know, mergers and acquisitions, they'll continue. You know, no question about that. That's always happened, ever, forever, you know, in all sectors. That will continue. But maybe just some thoughts on, if we focus on bringing new drugs to market, being innovative and fast-tracking drugs to market, maybe we could have some comments from the panels in terms of what are the pros and the cons, or the risks, if you like, the opportunities with regards to M&As and any concerns that the panel may have, but then also any opportunities in this sector. So maybe starting at the end with Nigel, if that's okay.
Okay, so the one thing I still want to see, the experiment I want to see happen, is 2 big pharma companies merge, and I guess a lot of the Actelion information will support this, when see what happens there. 2 big pharma companies merge and they spin out their R&D organisations separately. That's the ultimate that I want to see, and then I'll tell you whether M&A works.
Great, thanks.
Well, I mean, personally, I see the M&A as one mechanism and one tool to drive growth, but certainly is not the only one. And I think in Janssen we have been actually less more busy with small acquisitions and less busy with big mergers. I think that has been historically our background, but more and more we focus really on flexibility and collaboration, various different mechanisms. So M&A, I think it's a key. Whether we spin out R&D, I very much doubt that, Nigel, because I think an internal R&D is going to be a very important key to drive, to drive innovation. So I do not expect that to be completely external.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm still the strong believer that the innovation comes from the small companies. So for me, it's important to create an environment where these companies can be innovative, bring up the ideas, give them, I think some of the money, or the capital they will require to do the work. Let them fail, because that's something what I like. That will continue. They will just, at some point in time, if it's a good project, taken over by the larger pharma companies. And on the CMO front, I think growth is somewhat a point, but I think I'm really keen to see still some small niche CMO players. I think really serving that needs of the smaller biotech companies. I think helping them, to give that more that consultancy work style type, and not just focusing on the processes capacity like you needed for the large pharma companies.
That's great, thank you. Vincenzo?
Yeah, my view is on the biotech side, the scrutiny will continue to exist, so I do not expect an uptick in M&A activity, more or less the same level of 2017. On CRO, CDMOs, because of the growing outsourcing, I do see a lot of consolidation from strategic platforms and from financial investors. The idea is, even in the early stages, to build global, flexible, one-shop platform. So we continue to see 2018, 2019 a lot of activity in the outsourcing services, much more than the pharma biotech. As Araz said, in the pharma biotech there are other models that, because of the more balanced risk approach, are win-win solution for both companies, pharma and biotech.
That's great. No, thank you very much. I say thank you to the audience as well. Thanks for your participation today. I hope you've enjoyed the session, and I say please enjoy the rest of the day as well. So thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks for coming.